earth. Do you remember? Why have we taken birth? Do you remember?
Good morning. Those of you who were here last week know that I got knocked out of the saddle by kind of last minute. I called up Reverend Mary on Saturday afternoon and said, could you do the talk for me? Because I was not in shape to do the talk, and I could feel my energy not good. I've had a cold, and it's still lingering a little bit, so bear with me if you would today. But it's nice to be here. Good to be here and good to see you. So, Power of Decision, which is a great book by Raymond Charles Barker, and I know Mary started on this last week. And the problem with doing a two-part talk that somebody else does the first part of is they will steal some of your best material most of the time. And so, I had to watch the talk to make sure to see what she stole, and she stole my opening line, which was the opening very first sentence in the book, which is a fabulous sentence, which is, the individual's ability to act unintelligently in a universe of intelligence is amazing. We've had a bunch of examples of that this week too, haven't we? Yeah. My heart's heavy right now, so I just, please just know that with me. So last week, Reverend Mary talked about that one of the most powerful ways that we can act unintelligently, just in case you want to know how to do that, is to practice the practice of worry. And worry is the negative use of an imaging quality of our mind. We use our mind and its imaging quality to create what it is we want to experience in our lives. And when we worry, we hold negative images. We hold outcomes that we don't want and say, that's what I want to put my attention on. The law of attention doesn't care what we put our attention on. It just manifests what it is we put our attention on. As Michael Beckwith says, the universe doesn't care, it just wants to know what you're interested in, and what you're interested in is what it tends to manifest for you in your life. So if what you're interested in is more and more worry, and more about whatever you're worried about, that's what will show up, and then you'll say, gosh, look at that, see, it's true. The other one that he talks about, however, and we use today in today's reading, is the practice of blame. Blame. He talks about not blaming the world, not blaming the nation, not blaming your family. The other thing I'll say is not blaming other people, and not blaming your own past self. When we practice blame, blame puts responsibility for my life and my happiness on somebody else out there. I'm not taking any responsibility, and so it leaves me as being powerless. It disempowers me. And blame is one of those great practices that we all get to engage in, and point the finger and say, well, that person out there, and that country, and those people, and them, they, those out there are responsible for my unhappiness. And we fall into these patterns of worry and blame because we place too much attention on the sensory world. He talks about looking at the five senses, and that every mystic who has ever spoken has taught us that five sensory world, that world of appearances, isn't as real as we think it is. That facts are not reality, okay? And what we think is a fact, have you, like me, ever been absolutely sure of something only to find out that, no, it wasn't at all what you thought it was? And so we have that pattern that goes on, but we don't learn from it. Even our memories, we remember something that's a certain way, and then we suddenly have a conversation with somebody else who was there, and they say, no, that's not how I remember it at all. Okay? That's why eyewitnesses are never very good. They're not really reliable as testimony in a lot of cases. And the way to move past that, he says, is to listen within, to listen to the Spirit within. When we start to listen to that inner presence that is not fooled by outer circumstances, that is not sucked in by outer circumstances, we start to get grounded in the capital R reality of life. We start to get grounded in what is really happening, and then from there we can do decision making. It's one of the reasons we do a process called visioning. Visioning is a wonderful practice of getting in touch with what is Spirit's highest idea in any situation, in any given circumstance. And so we stop and we say, time out to the intellectual mind. We say, let me go to my intuition. Let me go to that part of me which connects to my highest and best. And start listening to that. Raymond Charles Barker goes on to say, the repetition of that which is known is not progress. In other words, doing the same thing over and over and over again is not progress. New ideas are as essential for the mind as food and water are for the physical body. You cannot progress on the basis of ideas that are now directing your thinking, feeling nature. That's a powerful statement. That's a challenging statement, because what he basically says is all that we know now has to fall away for us to move into something new. The way we've been doing it doesn't work. The Course in Miracles puts it this way: 99% of everything you think is wrong. It's a little more confrontive. Okay? Almost everything you think is wrong. Take a breath, please. So new ideas create life. New ideas come from listening to Spirit within. And new ideas are the decisions for where we want to go. New ideas move us forward. So the decision to let go of that which has completed its course in your experience is even more important than the decision to welcome new ideas. You cannot walk forward by looking backward. You cannot walk forward by looking backwards. Letting go and being aware and consciously saying, you know, this is no longer working in my life. This pattern, this idea, this thought, this whatever I've been doing is no longer working in my life. I need to let it go. Is a powerful, powerful thing to do. It frees us up to then have new decisions. And I want to talk about that because Reverend Mary last week also opened up the book, A World That Works for All. And it's a powerful book. It's something that we're going to be working with all of next year. And as she mentioned, in alignment with over 100 churches throughout our religious science movement, we're all going to be looking at this. And there's a power to group spiritual practice. When a whole lot of people are doing the same spiritual practice and focusing on something, there's a power that lifts all of us in that. And so I'm looking to a very powerful year for us as a movement and for us as a church and for us as a world as a result of doing this. And so I wanted to kind of talk about this also, like she did, and plant some seeds. I want to plant some seeds of ideas. She mentioned, and in this book, there are three archetypes that are dealt with. One is called the keepers, one is called the breakers, and one is called the menders. And these are archetypes that show up everywhere in our lives. These aren't just something out there. Each of us has that within us. Each of us has this mender, this breaker, and this keeper archetype within us. And what I want to ask is a question that in order to create a world that works for everyone, a world that works for all, where do we have to start? With ourselves. We have to start locally. And so we have to start with our homes, with our families, with our workplaces, with our center. You know, I'm prompted to ask the question, how are we going to create a world that works for all if we can't even create a center for spiritual living here that works for all? And I ask this question because this week I've been made aware of a great deal of unhappiness around the center. A lot of it directed at me. And so I want to talk about that because this archetype is at work. And if we're playing with this, and if we can't, if we as reasonable, pretty well enlightened, rational, intelligent people can't create a center that works for all, how do we expect to create a world that works for all? So I want to invite us to start to practice and play. And if as you're listening to this, you say, this doesn't touch me so much in the center, but it does touch me at my work, or it does touch me in my family, take that and apply it there. So I want to dive deeper into these archetypes and take a look at what they're about and how we play in them. And we play in all three of them. The first one are called the keepers. And these are the indigenous or original people usually in an area. They're the people who have been there since the beginning, whatever the beginning is, or they've been there for a long time. Okay? And each of these archetypes has a mythology out of which they operate, and they have a role that they play. And so the mythology of the keeper is that oftentimes, almost always, there is a past golden time. There was a great, wonderful time once when everything worked. You know, in the Celtic tradition, there's Camelot. In the Aboriginal tradition out of Australia, there's the dream time. You know, in the Native American traditions, you have lots of times when the great elders were around and the world was peaceful and all worked well. In the Chinese, ancient Chinese studies, there's a time of the Yellow Emperor when all was at peace and well. And we, of course, have our own golden time, don't we? But the mentality is that currently we're winding down to end times. We're winding down. It's not as good as it used to be. We're doing our best to try and keep it up, but it's gradually sinking down. In the Hindu tradition, there's the idea of the Brahman, and we're all involved in the dream of the Brahman, and the Brahman has 4 periods. And 2,500 years ago, they declared, and we are in the last period, we're winding down to the end of the dream of the Brahman. That was 2,500 years ago, by the way. Okay? The Christian tradition had the book of the Apocalypse. You know, we're winding down. Jesus is going to come back and kick the Romans out and create a new Jerusalem. So that's another part of it we'll talk about in a minute. But there's this idea that what we're doing now is winding down. And then there's also the mythology of sacred lands. So there's sacred burial grounds. There's sacred lands out of which, which are the sacred place of our tribe. Okay? And that place must be honored because it's sacred. So that's the mythology that works, and this goes to all keepers. The role of the keeper is to hold on to the past wisdom. It's to hold on to the beauty and the power of the past wisdom, to keep that sacred. And so you notice, for instance, Native Americans try and keep their shamanic traditions alive. Most indigenous tribes try and keep their shamanic traditions alive, their sacred traditions alive. And so it's to keep that alive. The positive aspect, one of the key positive aspects of the keepers, is that it connects us with our roots. It reminds us to stay connected with our deep roots. The negative is that they can get stuck in the past, can't move forward, and they don't see beyond the old ways or the old rules. There's a story that Margaret Mead was working with an Aboriginal tribe in Australia, and they had a belief that there was a particular place where there was the end of the world, and they eventually showed her where the end of the world was. It was out in the middle of the desert. And and to her, it's just a place in the desert. She doesn't see a line, okay? But she steps across the line they say is there, and she's looking back at them, and they're beginning to grieve and wail about the passing of her passing and how she's gone and dead and they'll never see her again. And she's standing going, wait, no, look, see, I'm right here. And they can't see her. And eventually she finally walks back on the other side of the line, and they go, oh my God, you've come back. Nobody's ever done that before. Okay? And so we have, when we're in keeper mentality, when we're in keeper mode, we can get stuck in, here's the line, and nobody can go further than this. Okay? And so what that sets up then is the need for the next archetype. The next archetype is what is known as the breakers. The breakers are those which break up this mentality, which break up this consciousness. The breakers are always the new people. Okay? So when European settlers came to America, they broke up the qualities and whatever was happening with the indigenous people here. When European settlers settled in Australia, they broke up what was going on with the indigenous tribes of that area. When Cortez and the Spaniards landed in South America, they did the same thing. Okay? And they bring bright, shiny new things with them normally. Okay? The mythology of the breaker is the old ways don't work. Throw everything out. The old ways don't work. The new ways are better. And we are working towards a bright future that tends to be my idea of the bright future. Got it? Okay? It's not a holistic future, it's a limited future. It's my idea. The role that the breakers play is evolution. They move things forward. They shake things up. However, they also clash with the keepers. And thus, if you look out at our world news reports today, you watch the dynamic of what's going on. The positive of the breakers is they bring change and forward movement. The negative is they can bring violence, both physical violence and sometimes, verbal or emotional violence. Turbulence might be a better way to put that. They can bring a my way attitude. They can lose touch with the deep roots and the cultural wisdom, and they can be motivated by greed because they can take advantage of the indigenous tribes and the indigenous people that were there. Okay? So we have the breakers. Eventually, however, that causes so much pain, and we're seeing this in the world, okay? So if you watch what's going on in the world, there are people who are trying to break up the old ways, and there are people who are trying to cling hard to the old ways, right? And right now, they're having some violent confrontations, physical violence and verbal violence and all sorts of stuff. Whether it's our presidential elections, whether it's the shootings in France or the bombings in Beirut or elsewhere that's going on, it's all this stuff. This is a clash between these two cultures. And, I just read something recently that the goal of ISIS or ISIL is actually to induce the Islamic version of Armageddon, the end times, so they can be assumed into heaven. All the Muslims can be assumed into heaven, and the rest of the infidels can go off to wherever the infidels go. That's the my bright, shiny future. Now we laugh about that, but there are Christians in our world who are trying to do exactly the same thing. It's been said that that's one of the reasons that we're so tight in America with Israel, is because there are people who believe that that is where Armageddon will start and want to help promote that and start the war that will start the end times of the world. Again, so that the righteous Christians can be assumed into heaven and the rest of the infidels can go off to the lake of fire. Okay? And so this is a my future, my way. I win, you lose. Finally, because we need this, we get to the menders. And thank God there are menders. Menders are healers. Their mythology is a belief in a oneness of all, that all is one, that we live in a both-and universe. We live in a universe where we can all have something that works. They tend to be accepting of all ways. They can find the good everywhere is another way of saying that, and that love is the highest virtue and value. Their role is to be the peacemakers. The role is to find ways that incorporate both the old and the new. The role is to unify and communicate with all sides. They're not afraid to talk to either side. The positive of the menders is that they heal the pain of the clash between the keepers and the breakers, and they hold a big holistic vision, a vision that encompasses everyone. The negative is they can oftentimes be discouraged by the process that goes on. They're oftentimes killed by the violence that's taking place or driven off by the verbal violence, and the fact that it takes time. And people oftentimes are not willing to take the time. They're not willing to wait and take the time. Because the process of mending is not one that just goes bang like that. So these are the archetypes that we have. And there's one more that they don't talk about in the book, but that I want to mention. And that's called what I will call the withholder. And a whole lot of people in the world play this role, by the way. And that is, I'm not going to play. It goes from, I don't know what to do, so I'm just going to sit on the sidelines and not play, to, I'm really upset with what's going on, so I'm going to withhold time, money, love, engagement of any kind. I'm just going to sit on the sidelines and judge, you're all doing it wrong, and I'm not going to get involved. Okay? And they work with a delusion because, as the metaphor goes, nobody is on the sidelines. There are no spectators in this game of life. We're all playing. We're all on the field. There's no timeouts, have you noticed? Okay? There's no really do-overs. We can recreate again, but we can't go back in time. Okay? And so it's a delusional position because the people actually are affected by life, but they choose to stay powerless by not being engaged. And so out of that, we go back to what Raymond Charles Barker talks about. We blame other people while not taking power ourselves, and that gives us no power of decision. Okay? So take a breath. Shake that out if you need to. So the question is, where do I want to play? Where do I want to play in this continuum? Now, what I want to say is none of those is wrong. Do you notice that in the healthy ways we need all three? Okay? We need to remember this deep sacred wisdom from which we come. We need to also not get trapped in that, so we need to get fresh new stuff going in. You know, Raymond talks about new ideas are the lifeblood of our soul, the lifeblood of everything. Moving forward, doing something new is the lifeblood of it. And we need people to help to heal the process, because whenever we start to do something new, we tend to get into grief about letting go of something old. I was talking about this with somebody recently. Several years ago, I had cataract surgery, and I've been nearsighted for almost my entire life. I had like 2400 vision for most of my life, which is basically what you can see at 20 feet, or a person with healthy vision can see at 20 feet, or excuse me, at 400 feet. I have to be within 20 feet to be able to see it. 420, got it? Okay. Pretty darn blind. Okay. Coke bottle bottom glasses since I was in second grade and all that sort of stuff. And so I was recently having cataract surgery, and they were going to put in corrective lenses to where I had 20/20 vision in my eyes. And one night I was sitting there before the surgery, and I was grieving because one of my habits, one of my processes that I used to love to do was late at night take off my glasses, put on some space music, have a glass of wine, and fuzz out. You know, when they said in Zen meditation, have a soft focus, all I had to do was take my glasses off and I was there, you know? And I was grieving because I wasn't going to be able to ever do that again once I got my 20/20, vision eyesight. So there's this part of us that even when we're moving forward into something that seems wonderful, we have a grief over what we're letting go of. Now trust me, the first time I got my 20/20 eyesight and I went driving down the road and I could see a mile down the road, it was like, ooh yeah, I love this. Okay, so I haven't had a whole lot of grief over it since then, you know. As somebody said, you can just have more wine and you'll still fuzz out. I don't tend to do that, but that is a possibility, you know. So, or I could smear Vaseline on my reading glasses and that would do it too. So all these archetypes are necessary. All these archetypes are necessary. And they're useful when we can use them as tools from a toolbox. What is the appropriate tool to be used here and now? We get stuck when we get stuck with only one tool. You know, when all we're carrying around is a hammer, the whole world looks like a nail. Okay? And so when all we're doing is trying to hang on to the past with everything we have, or trying to break everything up, then that's all we see. Even when all we're trying to do is mend things, we look for conflicts where there may not be any, just so we can go in and mend things. You've heard of firefighters who go start fires once in a while because they want a fire to put out. Doesn't happen too often, but we've seen that on the news. So what I want to invite you to do this week, this is our spiritual practice for the week, is to begin to ask yourself, what role have I been playing here? See, this is a wonderful place. This is a laboratory. The spiritual center is a laboratory. It's a place for us to play. It's a place for us to experiment. It's a place for us to try on new roles. It's a place for us to do things where we're held in the safety of a consciousness that is mostly a loving and accepting consciousness. Okay? So what role have I been playing so far here? What has it gotten me? What's been my payoff for that role? Second part, what role would I choose to play here going forward? If I wanted to play a different role, what role might I play going forward? Maybe it's the same role, but maybe it's with a little different energy around it. Maybe it's a different role. And what are the qualities, if I'm going to play a different role, or even if I'm going to play the same role with a different energy, what are the qualities that I have to either become to play that role, and what are the qualities that I have to release or let go of to play that role? Okay? And then the third one is to find an area to engage the role I choose and do so. Get engaged. See, life isn't a spectator sport. We have to make a decision, and then we have to act on the decision that we make. And sometimes, have you noticed that we make decisions and they don't work out? But we learn something from it. And so we can make a new, better, wiser decision. But if we make no decision and take no action, we learn nothing and we get stuck and nothing happens. And when we do that as a group of people, in whatever group it is, nothing happens. I used to be one of those people that I'd be with a group of people that say, let's go to lunch together. Where do you want to go? I don't know. And I find just say, let's go to such and such a place. I'd name a place. Because nothing was going to happen and nobody was going to make a decision and we were going to lose our entire lunch hour just standing around going, I don't know. And so we have to make a decision to get involved, to get engaged. It's not about the personalities. Every spiritual leader that has ever been on this planet has been imperfect. Have you noticed? Jesus was so well loved that they killed him in 1 year. Buddha's cousin tried to kill him. And by the way, he had left behind his wife and infant child to go get enlightened, which by today's standards we consider that kind of not really great behavior. Okay? Muhammad had his issues. Every spiritual leader has their issues. If you're looking for the perfect spiritual leader, he or she has yet to be born. Okay? And it's true of any ministry you stick up here, whether it's me or whether it's somebody else. I'm not perfect. When I was in Seattle, Reverend Kathy Ann Lewis, who was my minister for 20 years there and still is the minister there, is a challenging person to get along with. Let's just put it that way. There was a morning when I was running sound back in the 90s that I'd been yelled at and verbally abused so badly that I decided during the 8:30 service that at the end of the service I was going to pull every single wire out of the back of the board, take every single knob and dial and tweak it. And that was back in the days when they had not labeled any of the wires in the back of the board, and it would have taken them a week to figure out how to redo the board. And there was still the 9:45 and the 11 o'clock, which were the two larger services still to go. What prevented me from doing that was I realized that if I did that, I would never be welcome to set foot back in that church again. And I would lose two things. I would lose access to this teaching, because it was the only church in Seattle at the time that taught religious science. And I would lose access to my friends in my community. And both of those were more important to me than the personality of the minister. This church isn't about me. This church is about the teaching that we teach, the religious science teaching that we teach. That's what it's about. And so I'm going to invite you to ask, how engaged are you with that teaching? If you're not taking classes, if you're not doing stuff that engages you directly with the teaching, I invite you to get involved, to get jiggy with this teaching. It will set you free. I heard a comment recently that made me realize that there's a kind of a consciousness here of, I've taken that class, therefore I've checked it off and I'm done with it. I invite you to relook at that, because I find the classes get richer the more often I take them. Why? Because I'm a different and richer person. I was teaching Foundations a week and a half ago, probably the 50th time I've been through Foundations in some one capacity or another, and had a major aha from that class. 50 times I've been through that class. And so just because you've taken a class before doesn't mean you can't take it again, and doesn't mean A, you won't bring something that will help the rest of the students in the class, and B, you won't get something out of it yourself. One of the things I'm going to do this coming year, starting in January, is for those of you who have taken a class, we're going to do a half-off review price. So we're going to, you can take the class again for half the cost of the class to make it easier. But I invite you to get engaged in the teaching of this center. That is what will transform both your life individually and this center collectively. See, I can come or go as a minister, and just so we're clear, I intend to stay. Good. Okay? I've heard people who question that. I just want to be really clear. I have no intention. Home Office just sent out a couple weeks ago an email saying there are more open pulpits right now in the movement than any other time. And I just looked at that email and said, that's nice, and deleted the email. I didn't even look at the open pulpits. Okay? And so I want to be clear. I'm staying. You know, unless you guys tar and feather me and drive me out of here, which I don't think you're going to do, I'm planning to stay. I want to invite, and I'm planning to grow in this process, by the way. I'm not saying you're going, I ain't going to change, because I am. Okay? I learned not to post rants about social workers on Facebook. Those of you who know what I'm talking about. That won't be happening anymore. Okay? It's out of integrity. But we need to learn to play together. We need to learn to create a center that works for all together. Okay? And I'm inviting you to play with me with that. I'm inviting you to be part of that instead of standing back and hoping that it works and waiting to see and not being engaged. I'm going to close with a quote from Sharif Abdullah, who wrote the book, Creating a World That Works for All. All beings, all things are one. Our lives are inextricably linked one to another. Because of this, we cannot wage war against anything or anyone without waging war against ourselves. Therefore, we are obliged to treat all beings the way we want to be treated. There are no enemies. All beings are expressions of the sacred and must be treated as such. Some beings cause pain to others. This does not mean they are enemies. Some beings are food for others. This is all the more reason to treat them as sacred. Once we understand that we are interconnected, we have the responsibility to create a world that works for all. I invite you this week to open to that idea, to live with that question. How would I be if I was living as a participant in a world that works for all? And live that. Are you willing to play with that as a spiritual practice this week? Great. I am too. So let's move into prayer. I recognize that there is only one. There's only one life. Whatever name we give it, however we worship it, whatever we call it or don't call it, there is still only one life, one infinite presence. Its nature, touched by every mystic who has ever touched it, is a nature of absolute, infinite, deep love. Love beyond any other idea. And it operates through the process of law, through the process of that which we put into it is returned back to us. Not as a sense of reward or punishment, but just simply as a process. And each of us is one of this infinite presence right now. We always have been, we always will be, and we are right now one of this infinite love, one of this infinite grace. This is the truth of who each of us is. And so I speak my word that we use that power of our decision to make the decision to live in a world that works for all, to be citizens, to be participants in a world that works for all, in a center that works for all, in a workplace that works for all, in a family that works for all. Even when we don't know how that's going to be, we just simply make the decision, I am willing to be a participant in this. I may not know how it looks, but I make that decision. I make that choice. I call it forward. Because the power of our minds is so great that we can create that when we set our minds to it. I speak my word that we act intelligently in this field of intelligence, of infinite intelligence. We align ourselves and take the time and the practice to align ourselves deeply with that spirit that knows exactly how to exist, exactly how to express itself in, through, and as each of us, and knows how to be the world that works for all, because it already is that wholeness. And we are just simply here to wake up and remember this truth. And so for this, and for each person who participates and who is willing to participate in this, I am grateful for all the good that comes out of these decisions to say yes I am ever so grateful. For this center and for all the beings in it, I am ever so grateful. And so we release this word into the law that moves it into form and expression and knows how to do so and does so with ease, with grace, and with divine right action, right here and right now. And it is done. And together we say, and so it is.